The morning sunlight slid across the glass walls of Vale Industries, painting lines of gold over the spotless marble floors. The air inside the building carried a quiet tension, as if everyone could feel that the woman in charge was already impatient. Victoria Hale, Billionaire CEO, youngest in her field, and sharp as the diamonds she wore on her wrist, strode through the office with a tablet in one hand and a coffee she hadn't touched in the other. Every click of her heels reminded people she was near, and every glance she gave reminded them she expected perfection. Her assistant followed nervously Miss Hale. The maintenance team requested an extension for the south elevators. Victoria didn't look up. No extensions, tell them to fix it. Before the investors arrive, the assistant hesitated. They're short-staffed today, the janitor said. Victoria cut her off sharply. I don't care who said it. I want results, not excuses. She entered the elevator and pressed for the top floor, unaware that her morning would change the very way she saw success. At the penthouse level, she found chaos. Two executives argued over numbers, while an investor waited by the window, staring at his watch. She ended the argument with one cold sentence: "Get." Shout and try again when you're ready to think. She turned to the investor, forcing a smile. You'll have the proposal before lunch, I promise. As he nodded, she exhaled, tired already. It was only 9 in the morning, and her day felt longer than most people's weeks. When she stepped out to clear her head, she saw an older man crouched by the hallway vents, wiping the metal clean. His uniform was faded. The name tag said, Samuel. His hands were calloused but steady. He hummed softly as he worked. She walked past, but something in his calmness slowed her down. She turned back and said without thinking, You've been here a while, haven't you? He looked up, smiling. Yes, ma'am. Since before these walls had mirrors. She blinked before the renovation. That was 10 years ago. He nodded. Seems shorter when you enjoy what you do. Her curiosity sharpened like instinct. She asked almost teasingly, So tell me, Samuel, you've been here longer than most of my board members. If you were me, what would you do differently? He chuckled softly. Mom, I just mop floors, not numbers. She smiled, amused. Come on, give me your best advice. Pretend I'm not the boss. Pretend I'm someone who doesn't know a thing about money. He leaned on his mop for a moment, thoughtful before answering. If I were running a place like this, I'd spend less time counting profits and more time counting the people who make them possible. Her smile faded just a little. He continued quietly. Numbers don't grow if the hands that build them feel small. She didn't reply for a long moment. She only nodded once, then walked away faster than before, though the words stayed behind, echoing in her head. That night, long after the building emptied, Victoria sat alone in her office, looking at the quarterly report. She had earned more in a year than her entire staff combined, yet something about it felt hollow. She opened her notepad and wrote Samuel's words in the corner of the page. Spend less time counting profits and more time counting people. She stared at the sentence until her eyes blurred, then whispered to the empty room, Maybe that's where I went wrong? When the next morning came, the office buzzed with rumors. The CEO had called an all-department meeting for the first time in years. No one knew why. When everyone gathered in the atrium, Victoria stepped forward, microphone in hand, and said, Yesterday someone reminded me that success means nothing if you forget who helped you build it. From today, Vale Industries will raise the base wage and start new health benefits for maintenance and service staff. The crowd went silent, then broke into applause. At the back, Samuel stood with his mop in hand, smiling quietly. She met his eyes across the room and nodded slightly. In gratitude, he only nodded back and returned to cleaning, as if the world hadn't just changed because of him. A week after the announcement, Vale Industries no longer felt like the same place. Employees who used to avoid each other now shared coffee breaks. Maintenance workers smiled at executives in the hallway, and no one looked away in discomfort. The company that had once operated like a machine began to feel alive again, and at the center of it all was Victoria, watching quietly from her glass office above. She no longer spent her mornings buried in financial reports. Instead, she walked through every floor of the building, learning names, faces, and stories. The first time she stopped by the maintenance wing, her employees froze. Unsure if they were in trouble, she smiled softly, saying, "I wanted to see where the real work happens." Samuel, who was polishing the railing near the staircase, chuckled. "Careful, ma'am, you'll ruin your shoes." She laughed for the first time in weeks. Maybe they need to get dirty for once that afternoon. She called Samuel into her office. The man arrived nervous and awkward in his uniform, still carrying his rag. She gestured for him to sit. He hesitated. "Ma'am, I'm fine standing." She smiled gently. "Sit, Samuel, I don't bite." He sat slowly, glancing at the wall filled with photographs of her shaking hands with presidents and business partners. She noticed and said quietly, "You know, none of those pictures matter as much as what you told me last week." He looked surprised I was only speaking my mind. She nodded. "That's exactly why it mattered." She opened a folder on her desk and slid it toward him. Inside was a contract with his name on it. Samuel Thomas, Senior Operations Advisor. He blinked. "Ma'am, this must be a mistake." She shook her head. "I don't promote mistakes, I promote wisdom. You see cracks where others see polish, and that's what this company needs." He looked at her speechless. She said softly, "You've spent your life keeping this building standing. It's time we made sure you stand with it." He left her office that day, carrying the contract in trembling hands. The next morning he arrived wearing a new uniform the company had ordered for him, with his new title stitched across the pocket. The staff cheered as he entered, and someone shouted, "The man who changed the boss." Samuel only laughed, shaking his head. "I didn't change her. She just started listening, under Victoria's leadership and Samuel's guidance." Vale Industries transformed into something no one thought possible. Productivity rose, but so did morale. The investors praised the numbers, but Victoria smiled, knowing the numbers weren't the victory. The people were, one evening as the sun dipped behind the skyline, she stood beside Samuel on the rooftop garden, the wind carrying the faint hum of traffic below. She said quietly, "Do you ever regret giving me that advice?" He smiled. "Never, ma'am. But I didn't think you'd actually listen." She looked at him, a bit amused. Neither did I. They stood there in silence, watching the city glow beneath them. Samuel said softly, "You built the walls, ma'am. I just reminded you where the foundation was." She turned to him, eyes warm. "Maybe one day I'll be wise enough to see it before someone else has to point it out." He chuckled. "That's the secret, ma'am. The wise ones keep asking, and the proud ones stop listening." That night, Victoria wrote something new in her notebook beside the first line she had. Written weeks ago, "Numbers don't grow if the hands that build them feel small." Under it, she added, "The strongest empires are built by the quietest voices." Months passed, and the changes inside Vale Industries began to ripple far beyond its walls. Reporters started writing about the company that treated janitors like advisors and executives like equals. Competitors tried to copy the model, but they could never replicate what made it work: sincerity. Because what had started as one janitor's words had turned into a culture of listening. Victoria was invited to speak at a global business summit. The host introduced her as the CEO who rebuilt her empire from the ground up, literally. Standing on stage, she looked out at a sea of leaders dressed in power suits and said quietly, "I used to think leadership was about control. But then a man with a mop taught me that it's about care." The audience laughed softly, thinking it was a joke, until she continued, "No one in this world is beneath you unless you choose to stand above them. Remember that." The speech went viral overnight. Her words played on television screens around the world, and people who worked thankless jobs watched it with pride. But the next morning, while the world praised her, Victoria found herself walking down the same hallway she had passed so many times before stopping where Samuel was fixing a loose vent. She smiled. "I'm famous because of you." He chuckled, wiping his hands. "Ma'am, I just talk. You're the one who made the change." A few weeks later, she called a company-wide event in the main atrium. The room was filled with employees from every department, suits, standing beside uniforms, laughter filling the air. She walked on stage holding a small box and said, "When I first met Samuel, he told me something that changed me. Numbers don't grow if the hands that build them feel small. So today we're naming a new mentorship program after him. It will train every leader we promote to start their journey, where ours began by spending a week working with our support staff." The crowd erupted in applause. Samuel tried to hide behind a column, but the employees pushed him forward. Victoria handed him the box. Inside was a gold pin engraved with the words, "Foundation First." He looked at it silently before whispering, "Thank you, Mom," she said, smiling. "No, Samuel. Thank you for giving this company its heart." Back years rolled by. Samuel eventually retired, though he visited often to check the shine of the floors out of habit. On his last day, Victoria met him at the entrance, the same place they first spoke. The hall was lined with employees clapping as he walked by. He stopped at the door, looked back and said softly, "You kept your promise, ma'am. You never stopped listening." She felt her throat tighten and said, "You never stopped teaching." After he left, the building felt quieter for a while, but his presence never really faded. She kept his old mop handle in her office, polished and mounted beside her desk, as a reminder of where her transformation began. Visitors often asked about it, and she would smile, saying, "That's the tool that built my company." Years later, when she finally retired, she wrote her last letter to the employees. It ended with a single sentence that captured everything she had learned. Leadership is not about who speaks the loudest, it's about who listens the longest. Years later, the story of the billionaire and the janitor became part of company legend. Vale Industries stood as one of the most admired organizations in the world, not only for its profits, but for its humanity. New employees heard the story during orientation, about the woman who once measured success in billions, and the man who taught her that value cannot be counted in numbers. The framed photograph of Samuel and Victoria hung in the headquarters lobby beside a plaque that read, "Leadership begins with listening." After Samuel's retirement, the mentorship program that bore his name became a global movement. Companies across countries adopted it, requiring every executive to spend their first week in service roles, sweeping halls, washing windows, and learning names. Most found it humbling, some found it life-changing. A journalist once asked Victoria how it felt to see her idea spread. She replied simply, "It was never my idea. It was his." In her later years, she devoted her time to philanthropy, building schools and community centers for working families. She called them foundation houses, and each one carried Samuel's words carved into stone numbers. "Don't grow if the hands that build them feel small." Every time she visited one, she spoke to the janitors first, sitting with them over coffee, asking about their days as if paying tribute to where her journey began. One morning she received a letter written in careful handwriting. The envelope carried no return address. Inside was a note that read, "Miss Hale, I am Samuel's granddaughter. He passed last winter, but before he did, he made me promise to tell you he never stopped shining the floors of his heart for this world. He said you gave him the one thing he thought he'd lost: purpose." Victoria read the words twice before tears blurred the ink. She folded the letter gently and placed it in her journal beside the first sentence she had ever written about him. Spend less time counting profits and more time counting people. On the day of her own farewell event, she stood before her employees one last time, the atrium filled with faces she had come to know, not as staff, but as family. She said softly, "When I started this journey, I thought leadership was about being seen. Now I know it's about seeing others. When I met Samuel, I was at the top of the world, but I had forgotten to look down and thank the ones holding it up. You all are my foundation." After the applause faded, she walked through the halls for the final time, stopping at the janitor's closet that once belonged to Samuel. It was spotless as always. On the wall hung his old name tag, polished and framed. She smiled, touched the glass and whispered, "You taught me to listen, old friend." And I never stopped. Outside the building, the evening sun painted the windows in gold, making the glass glow like it held fire within. Somewhere between those reflections was the memory of a conversation that had changed everything, between a billionaire, too busy to listen, and a janitor wise enough to speak. The empire she built still stood tall, not because of wealth, but because of the words that built its heart. If this story made you smile, share it with someone who needs a reminder that accidents can turn into beautiful beginnings.